Norman Jackson has always been a man of gestures, not words. At 53 years old, he bore the marks of decades in the same automotive parts factory on the outskirts of the industrial city. His daily ritual was unchangeable. He would wake up at 5 in the morning, brew strong coffee, kiss Beatrice on the forehead while she pretended to sleep, and head off to work with his lunchbox and thermos. At the end of the day, he returned with his nails marked with grease, even after a thorough wash in the factory locker room. It was as if the grease was a part of him, just like the smell of metal and oil that permeated his work clothes. Beatrice would say she could find him in the dark, just by the smell. A real working man's smell, he used to say in the early years of marriage, with a proud smile that would make her cheeks blush. Beatrice was a history teacher at a public school. While Norman worked with concrete, screws, gears, tangible pieces, she navigated the world of ideas. She had brown hair with some grey strands that she never bothered to hide, almond-shaped eyes always attentive, and delicate hands that gestured as she spoke about revolutions and fallen empires. The apartment where they lived, on the 3rd floor of a simple building, was the portrait of the life they had built together. It wasn't luxurious, but it had personality, bookshelves that Beatrice collected, tools meticulously organised by Norman in a small improvised workshop in the service area, and photographs that marked the important moments of 20 years together. On weekends, Norman would fix things around the house. He polished the furniture patiently, changed a burnt-out light bulb, adjusted a squeaky door. His tools were extensions of his fingers, precise, reliable. Beatrice watched those gestures with admiration. There was a language between them that dispensed with words. A look, a touch on the shoulder, a glass of water offered at the right moment. In the early evening, Norman and Beatrice would have tea. They talked about the day, or sometimes just observed the sky in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who know each other deeply. On their days off, they visited the municipal park. Norman would sit on a bench under a leafy tree, watching Beatrice feed the birds. She had a crystalline laugh that echoed when the pigeons gathered at her feet, scrambling for breadcrumbs. In those moments, Norman felt a tightness in his chest, a mix of gratitude and fear of not deserving that simple happiness. But everything changed on a November night, 7 years ago. The sky was heavy with dark clouds foretelling a storm. Daniel, Beatrice's younger brother, had been staying with them for 2 weeks. At 22, he was the antithesis of Norman. He spoke loudly, slept late, and scattered paint tubes and sketches across the living room table. Daniel was studying visual arts at the local university. He had the same smile as Beatrice, but his eyes were restless, always searching for something beyond. He wore colourful band t-shirts, tousled hair, and an unkempt beard. Norman complained about his brother-in-law's disorganised ways, but secretly admired his free spirit. "The boy needs structure," Norman would comment to Beatrice at night in bed. "But he has talent. That painting he did of the sunset over the lake, there's something there." Beatrice would smile in the dim light. "He admires you, you know? The other day he told me he wanted to be half the man you are." Norman would huff, change the subject, but go to sleep with a warmth in his chest. Daniel didn't have a present father figure. His father had left the family when he was just 5 years old, leaving Beatrice and his mother to raise him. Norman, without realising, filled that void. They would talk about the future in art, about responsibility, about how to dream with their feet on the ground. "Art is important, boy, but the world is tough," Norman would say, serving Daniel coffee on the mornings when he managed to wake him up early. "You need to have a plan, you understand?" Daniel would nod, his eyes still heavy with sleep, absorbing the words like an apprentice before the master. On that fateful November morning, Beatrice left early for a meeting at school. Norman woke up later that day, prepared coffee, left the coffee maker off, and double-checked that the stove was turned off before leaving. Daniel was still sleeping after a night dedicated to a college project. "Take care, kid," Norman said, lightly knocking on the door of the guest room. He heard a muffled groan, which he interpreted as a response. The day at the factory was like any other. Norman oversaw the assembly of parts for a new client, checked measurements and trained a new employee. At lunchtime, he ate his packed lunch while flipping through a catalogue of new tools. At 5:38 p.m, his phone rang. The supervisor called him to the administration office. There was a family emergency. Norman's world changed colour. It became dark, cold, dead. The firefighter's words sounded distant, as if coming from inside a tunnel. Gas leak. We tried. There was no time. I'm sorry. Beatrice was already there when he arrived, sitting on the sidewalk in front of the building, her face pale, her eyes empty. She was not crying. It seemed as if she had dried up inside. The preliminary investigation pointed to a gas leak in the apartment. Daniel, sleeping, did not notice the odour. He had no chance. In the days that followed, Norman revisited every minute of that morning in his mind. He was sure he had checked everything before leaving. But the guilt settled in like a parasite. What if he had forgotten something? What if the kettle was left on the stove and went out, releasing the gas? What if... The funeral was brief. Norman couldn't look at Daniel's mother, his mother-in-law, a grey-haired lady who seemed to have aged 10 years in one day. Beatrice remained by his side, but there was a chasm growing between them. A chasm made of unspoken words, of silent accusations, of shared guilt. Norman stopped talking, stopped smiling, stopped existing. He returned to work after 2 weeks, but he was just a body moving mechanically. Colleagues avoided mentioning the accident. His supervisor offered him extended leave, which he refused. Work was the only thing keeping him going. At home, the silence was deafening. The room where Daniel slept remained closed for months. Beatrice put away the paints, brushes and sketchbooks in boxes that went into the closet. Life went on, but not for them. They were two ghosts inhabiting an apartment that no longer felt like home. Beatrice also broke inside, but in silence. She cried when he slept. She felt anger for having lost her brother, but what hurt the most was losing her husband in life. He no longer touched her, didn't talk to her. He just survived, day after day, looking at the ground as if paying for a crime. At night, Norman would wake up in a cold sweat, his breath laboured, haunted by nightmares in which he tried to reach Daniel in a smoke-filled room. Beatrice pretended not to notice, knowing he would reject any form of comfort. During that dark time, Beatrice tried to bring light back. She suggested therapy, trips, new beginnings. He refused everything. His look said, "I don't deserve it." On the first anniversary of Daniel's death, Beatrice placed a picture of him in the living room, a self-portrait that the young man had painted the previous semester. Norman couldn't look at the picture. He started avoiding the living room, seeking refuge in the bedroom. Slowly, over the years, they developed a routine of silent coexistence. They were like two planets orbiting the same sun, close but never touching. Meals were moments of contained tension. They shared a bed but slept back to back. 7 years passed in this way. 7 years of unprocessed grief, of guilt fed daily, of love suffocated by remorse. On the morning of their 20th wedding anniversary, Norman woke up before the sun. He lay there, watching Beatrice's profile in the dim light. Then, he got up quietly. He opened the wardrobe and took out a small suitcase he had bought the previous week. He packed some clothes, toiletries, and documents. He wrote a brief note, but then tore it up. Some things needed to be said looking into one's eyes. When Beatrice awoke, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, the suitcase at his feet. "Are you going to work already?" she asked, her voice still hoarse from sleep. "I'm not going to work today," he replied, his voice choked. Beatrice sat up, suddenly alert. There was something different in the air, a dense energy that heralded change. Norman stood up, took the ring off his finger and placed it on the bedside table. The metal made a small metallic sound as it touched the wood like a sad musical note. "I can't live here anymore. I can't look at you without remembering Daniel. Without remembering that it was me who, he said, swallowing his tears. You need someone better. Someone who lives and loves you. I've decided to try to start a new life without you. For your own good. Beatrice didn't show any surprise. She didn't argue, nor did she cry. It was as if she had rehearsed that moment mentally for years. There were no more tears to shed. Just a deep resignation, like someone finally receiving confirmation of a diagnosis already expected. She asked him to wait, and went to the desk drawer, took out an envelope, and handed it to him. Open when you are far away, he said firmly. Norman took the envelope with trembling hands. He wanted to say something to explain that it was not abandonment, but liberation. That she deserved to rebuild her life without the burden of him, without the constant reminder of the tragedy. But the words died in his throat. He left the apartment without looking back, carrying only the small suitcase and the envelope. The sky was overcast, foreshadowing rain, just like that day, 7 years ago. He wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood streets. He hadn't planned where to go. Maybe a cheap hotel while he looked for a place to rent. Maybe another city. He just wanted distance, space to breathe without the ghost of guilt suffocating him every moment. He stopped at an empty bus stop a few blocks from home. He sat on the cold metal bench and looked at the envelope in his hands. Beatrice had told him to open it when he was far away, but something compelled him to do it now. With uncertain fingers, he opened the envelope. There were 2 papers inside. The first was an official document, a technical report, dated 3 months ago. Norman frowned, not immediately understanding what it was about. He started reading and his heart raced. It was a new inquiry, reopened after structural problems were identified in the building due to complaints from other residents. The document detailed a thorough investigation into the accident that had claimed Daniel's life. Leak identified in the building's external pipeline. There were no signs of improper use of household equipment. It is a structural failure. The words danced before his eyes. He read it 3 times to be sure. A failure in the external pipeline. Nothing he had done or failed to do. It was not his fault. The weight he had carried for 7 years seemed, for a moment, to lighten. But soon confusion took over. Why hadn't Beatrice shown this before? Why keep this information until now? Then he picked up the second paper. It was a handwritten letter in handwriting he immediately recognized. Daniel. The paper was yellowed, probably written years ago. Norman, I was never good at speaking. But I wanted you to know you were more than a brother-in-law. You were the example of a man I never had at home. I felt safe here. Even when life was a mess, I knew that being with you made me feel good. You taught me that it's possible to be strong even in silence. Thank you for having me. Daniel. Norman began to tremble. The letter slipped from his fingers, flying with a gust of wind. He caught it in the air, desperate not to lose it. Then the tears came, not a restrained cry, but an uncontrolled sobbing that shook his entire body. A scream, contained for 7 years, finally found its way out. The people passing by looked, some with concern, others with discomfort, but he didn't care. Years of pent-up emotions overflowed like a dam that finally gives way. When he finally managed to calm down, he realized what he needed to do. He got up from the bench, left the suitcase right there and started running back home. To Beatrice. The sky darkened and the rain began to fall, first a few drops, then a downpour. Norman ran, drenched, the papers protected under his shirt. The street seemed longer on the way back, as if the universe were testing his determination. He arrived at the building at dusk, ran up the stairs breathless, his heart beating as it hadn't in years. He stopped in front of the door to his home. Was it still his home? Took a deep breath and turned the doorknob. Beatrice was in the kitchen, stirring a cup of tea. She didn't turn when she heard the door. Perhaps she was expecting him. "Did you read it?" she asked, her voice calm. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he asked, his voice broken. Beatrice sighed, still facing away from him. Her shoulders were tense, but there was also a kind of relief in her posture. I didn't know how to bring up this topic again, and because you wouldn't have believed me, I was convinced that I deserved to carry this guilt. And deep down, maybe I also left you too alone, because I was broken too. She then turned. Her eyes were steady but tired. There was dignity in her suffering, a strength that Norman had forgotten she possessed. I lost my brother, but losing you for all these years hurt too. I wanted to hate you at first, you know, but I only saw pain. I only saw a man falling apart every day, and I didn't know how to reach you inside. Norman fell to his knees on the kitchen floor, as if dropping the weight of a lifetime. The tears returned, silent now. They were no longer tears of despair, but of liberation. I just wanted to protect him, he whispered. It was my duty to take care of him, to take care of you. Beatrice slowly approached. There was no immediate hug, no instant forgiveness, just a presence, a different silence. She reached out, lightly touching his shoulder. We both got lost, she said. Maybe it's time for us to find each other again. Norman looked up at the face of the woman he had loved for 20 years. He saw there not only pain but also possibility. A beginning. He got up slowly, as if he were learning to stand again. He reached out, hesitant. Beatrice took it in hers. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the streets, the memories, the guilt. Inside that apartment, two broken people were finally beginning to piece the shards back together. The mourning would not end that night. The pain would still be there in the morning. But there was, for the first time in 7 years, an open window, a possibility of healing, a way back home. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.